Welcome to Design Notes. I'm Liam Spradlin, and this week I spoke with Ryan Oldenburg, founder of Pushbullet. We covered a lot of ground, including Pushbullet's vision, opinionated and extensible design on the web and Android, the hamburger drawer, advertising, and yes, monetizing apps in the current ecosystem. Let's get started. All right, so I guess just to start off, the first thing I want to talk about is basically your journey to now. How did you get to where we are right now?
So Pushbullet has been kind of a long, part of my life at this point. So I started it originally as a side project while I was working at another software company called Hipmunk, which does travel search. And I was their Android developer. I was working on the app and playing around with notifications and push, and this whole idea of actionable notifications had just come out in Jelly Bean at the time, so that kind of dates it. And I realized, my notification tray is this awesome part of my phone. I want to be able to control it a little bit and put my own stuff in there. So the original version of Pushbullet was I should be able to get a note as a reminder or a link right into my notification tray so I can do stuff with it. And so at this point, it was just me as a side project, released it, and it ended up getting quite a bit of early traction to the point that I kept working on it. A lot of side projects by developers get released, maybe a few people hear about it, and that's kind of all there ever is to it, and it ends up being a fun project that they learn something from, but not something many people use. For us, that didn't really happen. Within the first few weeks, there was over 10,000 people signed up to try it out, and that's pretty awesome. So at that point, I got a few other people that I worked with who were also developers interested in seeing if we could make this a little bit more real. So the three of us got together, started working on it full time, which means we did leave our jobs. We actually wrote a little piece for Android Police that Artem over there was nice enough to publish, talking about how we've made this big change. And after doing that, we applied to a incubator out here, or accelerator, or whatever you want to call it, in Silicon Valley called Y Combinator, which is a program for promising young companies to get a chance to get some expertise, some exposure to investors, and an opportunity to really see how big you can make what you're working on. And they accepted us, and this was early 2015, I think, that we did that. 2015 it must have been. Years are hard to remember. So they took us in, and we immediately kept working. We kept growing. It was a 3-month program. At the end of it, we actually were able to raised some money, publicly announced that we raised over $1 million, $1.5 million at that point, to grow Pushbullet, to see exactly how big we could make it. And in a sense, this was a dream come true because I moved out to San Francisco because I wanted to eventually start my own company, but you don't just usually start there. So I was like, I'll work at Hipmunk, it's a great place, and then I'll build side projects until I decide I want something to work. And then lo and behold, my very first side project becomes this thing that's not entirely unsuccessful, right? So that was pretty funny, and I just kind of was riding the wave. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to work on this full time because it's growing. I'm going to see if I can get investors to back it because I think that I'm working on a problem a lot of people could care about. That was the thesis. And the investors decided they cared, they backed us. So we got some money, and we decided to do it a little bit more real. Hired 4 people, so 3 co-founders plus 4 employees. We peaked at 7 people. And I'm telling the whole story here, by the way, but we can come back to details later. And decided, okay, we're going to try and be on all the platforms consistently with a high level of quality that's easy to use, all the while delivering really useful functionality and not being constrained by, the lowest common denominator, if you will. So if we can do something great on a platform, we're going to do it there, even if we can't do it everywhere. And we're going to pay the price of a little bit of confusion and some of that, which I've learned a lot from making that choice. And after what would it have been, maybe 2 years or something, Pushbullet had grown to the point that it had 1 million people using it every month on an active basis. Several more million were registered, but obviously not everybody sticks around. So we had reached kind of a pretty decent milestone. And at that point, a little bit of another side of reality sets in, which is investor money does not last forever. And everything becomes real at some point. And so bills need to get paid, salaries need to get covered, and you have to have that money somewhere. So our choice was either trying to raise more money through investors or to find out if Pushbullet is something that people would support financially, pay for, or alternative models. Like, in other words, could Pushbullet pay for itself somehow? And we thought about a few options, and we ended up deciding on the business model called freemium, which is this idea where you give most of a service away for free, and then if people are using it a lot or relying on it or getting a lot of value out of it, their use requires them to have an upgraded account, which they have to pay for. So the whole point of it is it's not ads, which we can talk about at some point, and it also leaves the service mostly for free for people just getting, just using it mildly, or even pretty heavily, but they're not necessarily going to pay for it. And then you just hope that you have enough people out there for whom your product really is valuable and they're willing to support it. So we did that, and it has worked out for us in spite of being immeasurably controversial, which we can also talk about. But that is the TLDR version of Pushbullet's history. It's been, started as a side project, managed to attract some investors, continued to grow, and unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, had to grow up a little bit as well along the way. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. That covers like the first 20 of my questions or so.
Oh, does it? Yeah, that's funny.
But yeah, I want to get a little bit deeper into kind of like the product design for Pushbullet and
sure,
kind of the rationale behind why it exists and where it is now, and how it evolved from a product perspective. So what would you say is kind of like Pushbullet's goal, or like the like one-line pitch of Pushbullet's kind of vision?
Sure. Pushbullet came out of my experience working at a computer and having a phone, and the two of them basically having no idea what the other was doing or like talking or anything. So if my phone rang, my computer had no idea. My phone would be sitting in my pocket buzzing. It received a text, received some other notification. Or if I wanted to send something from my phone or my computer to my phone or the other way, it was impossible. So the like one simple statement is your phone and your computer or your other devices should all basically know who you are and what's happening so that you can do what you need to do wherever you are. So if you get a text, of course your computer should know. It knows who you are. It knows that you got a text, and it can easily let you type a reply. But without running software like Pushbullet, that isn't possible. Obviously, there's others that do that component of what Pushbullet does, but I think we do it the best. And it all comes out of this simple problem, which is if I'm working at my computer, I shouldn't need to be constantly grabbing my phone. I simply shouldn't need to. I have a screen in front of me. Everything that's happening on my phone should be happening there too.
Okay. And something that I always ask designers is how do you know when your work is done? And for a product where design is just one component, there probably isn't such a thing as done. But how do you feel that Pushbullet has kind of fulfilled its vision, or like to what degree do you think it's like fulfilled that, and how would it do it even better, I guess?
So that touches on something that I think we've really spent a lot of time thinking about and working on, which is, it sounds simple, right? You have a phone, you have a computer, you should be able to do things like texting and phone calls and moving data between these two things really easily, but actually that is pretty much an incredibly huge space of problems to try and solve for people. The ones we've already solved are, of course, the ones I'm naming and are obvious because they're things people already obviously like: moving links, moving files, texting, phone calls, whatever. But for us to be done, I think, would basically mean we ran out of ideas, not so much that we've solved all the problems. Right. The other half of it is, okay, you do all of these things, but every trick you add to a product, in a sense, makes it worse a little bit and should hopefully make it better more than it makes it worse. And the price it makes it worse is because it's now more confusing, it's more complicated, it's more fragile. There's all of these ways that the more you add to something, the worse it gets. You just hope that you're ahead of that curve a little bit. So make it 10% worse to make it 30% better, you've come out ahead, in theory. But it's not true for everyone, and it's not true universally. So it's a little bit tricky, and for us, it's been something we're constantly thinking about. Every time we talk about a new feature, we're like, okay, does this make sense? Where do we put it? Is it going to make it more complicated? Like, should it be a different app? We've talked about, we even tried that once with an app we made called Portal, which we felt was quite different from the Pushbullet experience as we had defined it. And, it's interesting the feedback you get when you try something like that, because some people are like, oh, this is so beautifully simple, I love it. And others are like, why isn't this in Pushbullet? Why do I have to install another app? And it's like, well, I don't know if I can make both of you happy if they were two different people, right? I can't make it as simple as it is when it's just one app doing just that, if I cram everything in one app to make the other guy happy. But at the same time, not everyone wants 5 million apps on their phone to be able to do the core 10 things they want to do. So for us, done is connected to the idea of it being simple and reliable, and it's a bit of a moving target because we don't always know the right answer, and you only can find out by just doing it, and it's hard to even do it once, let alone kind of more than once. So
right, and I think that's a problem that a lot of people are trying to address. Like I've seen innumerable Medium posts about how the future of apps is notifications, or the future of apps is no apps, or the future of apps is one app, or like tons of things where people make bold predictions. Or on the other hand, you can have product management Google style, which is to add features and add features and add features until such a time as you decide to do a redesign, at which point you drop or hide almost everything and then decide what users really want after all. But it's an interesting question because, like you said, you want to accommodate these power users who have just an ever-growing list of desires, but you can't kind of lock out the new people or people who just want it for like a simple purpose. So kind of like spinning off of that, Pushbullet has, I feel like, a pretty unique way of handling its feature set, which is kind of like a message style interface, like you're kind of chatting with yourself. How did it evolve to that point? Like, what were some of the discussions that went into like making that decision?
That was actually an incredibly interesting little period in our history. So you're correct. Originally, Pushbullet didn't really know how to present the data you had sent to yourself because it's not an email. It's maybe not a message, but to put it on a card makes it seem so bulky and heavy and inefficient. So that was the first problem. It's like, okay, when you're sending links and files to yourself, what does the history of it look like? And how do we make that understandable for everyone? And then you add to that, okay, well, that's only for yourself. People actually use Pushbullet in a whole bunch of ways. They'll often follow feeds, and they'll want to get notifications for things. So that's sort of a timeline in a way. And then on the other side of things, they'll be using us to share links, files, or just chat with friends. And so in a sense, it seems so simple, like, oh, well, if you have chat, obviously just use the chat interface. But it wasn't actually that simple because we could have just used 2 different interfaces, right? We could have used one style of interface for the following, a different for yourself, even a third for the chat. But when we looked at the other things we were doing, we realized, okay, so if you are messaging with someone else, it's obviously chat. If you send things to yourself, or if you're receiving things, a messaging chronology and interface actually, I think, is good. It's simple to understand. It's tight, meaning if you're showing some text, you're using as little screen real estate as is necessary to express that and have it be visually clear. It's a little awkward for us when you're talking to yourself, but I also think that as soon as people get they're talking to themselves, it becomes incredibly simple to understand how to use this. So, oh, I send links to my friend, and then he gets it on his devices. Well, I wonder if I send it to my phone, what happens? Oh, I get a notification like I got a message. This is so simple, right? This is like, it basically falls into a paradigm they're familiar with, and that's a really, I think, good thing. The place that got even more interesting for us is we also do SMS. So you can use us to text from your computer. And the great thing about the messaging interface is it, of course, works for SMS too. And so, in a sense, what we achieved, whether or not it was all good or not, is that we have a consistent experience for the concept of like messaging and history. And it's the same whether you're using it with someone else, whether you're texting, whether you're receiving notifications, or whether you're sending messages to your own devices. It's all one paradigm, one way of seeing it, understanding it, internalizing it. It's simpler that way, I think. It comes with a price. Not everyone loves the idea of it looking like a messenger, but I do think that if you took some random person off the street and you showed them the messaging interface of a history of links you pushed between your devices, they would go, oh, these are messages and they're links, right? It would be very obvious. If you showed them a list of cards with links on them, they would have literally no idea other than that these were links in a list on a phone. Like there would be no expression of the idea of movement, basically. And I think the messaging part really does capture that for us. On top of cards having so much stuff around them. There's always the border, the drop shadow, the padding, the actions in the corner, the labeling. Like it attracts so much visual stuff that you can make look good, but doesn't actually have any real value. And so we also wanted to like cut that. If you send a link to your phone, all you should need to see is whatever text you associated with it and the link and a share button. And if you want to do something deeper, you can long press on it or get contextual or something like that. But again, that taps into the power user versus normal user problem. So. Right. Anyway, that's where messaging came from, is we were seeking consistency and an expression of what's happening so that people can pick up on it a little easier.
Right. And I remember back in the dark ages, emailing stuff to myself all the time, like screenshots or what have you. So it's kind of like something people were already doing, just in a way that's faster and makes more sense, I guess. And also, if you are like uploading things to Dropbox just for your own access later, there's kind of like no provenance of where it came from, or I mean there's a date of when you put it there, but there's not kind of a history of actions, I guess.
Yeah, so the value I think there is like people remember things in order, I think. So if you send yourself a link and then a file and then a day passes and you send yourself another link and maybe a week passes and you haven't done anything, you'll still remember like, oh, I sent myself that file like after I sent that link a week ago, right? Like that's just how we remember things. So it's super easy to go back and be like, oh, there it is, right? Whereas in Dropbox, like what folder did I put it in? Well, that's, unless you're an organizer, that's kind of not necessarily the easiest thing to remember 6 months later, and as everybody knows, right? So, and then, we're not necessarily used in the same way as Dropbox, so I don't think we're really even, competitors at all. It's just this one problem people had didn't have a solution. And that problem was moving data just simply and quickly between devices.
Right. And so I bring up Dropbox just as an example of kind of like the hacky ways that people use to get things between devices. For sure. There's, I could name a ton, but because I've used them all. But anyway, while we're on the topic of the kind of like chat design, what is the design process like at Pushbullet just in general? Like, say, if you want to integrate a new feature or something.
Yeah. So this has been kind of an evolving process where I would say the biggest theme is a rising standard. So when we originally got started with Pushbullet, side project, no designers, no real awareness of what design was other than that I knew apps I liked and tried to just kind of copy them a little bit. And this was also back in the day when there was no material design. There was no like guide at all. All you could really do was take apps, like take screenshots, decide you liked that, and try to recreate it for your own purposes. That was like the reality of app design, which in effect maybe still is, but material design helps a lot. And so basically the story of Pushbullet has been, okay, well, we're getting pretty popular. I think we should focus on simple. We should maybe decide what our brand is. We should think about consistency and how we can make it so that people don't get lost if they try different platforms or lost if they don't happen to know what they're trying to do in the first place. So, from some things as simple as like deciding on our core colors to deciding on the messaging interface and how that unified all of the sections of Pushbullet in a way, worked really well for us. As far as how we actually do that, it's really the biggest thing that constrains a small team is time and effort. So like it's so easy to come up with a million good ideas. The problem is you're going to have time to implement like one of them, and it's going to take a really long time. So what I would say is we've tried to know where we want to get and always make sure that anytime we do something, we're moving closer there instead of further. And so messaging was a really big opportunity for us, and it was a huge project, but it allowed us to like get one paradigm for all of these different types of actions people were taking in Pushbullet. So it was a really big victory for us. And I think it made our website massively better. Our apps, people don't need to even open Pushbullet if they don't want to. And so that's another kind of aspect of the whole design, which is more product instead of visual, which is for moving stuff between your own devices, the best case scenario for us is that you never even need to open our app in the full sense. So if you are looking at a picture, you can share it through the share menu to another device with only seeing the lightest of Pushbullet interfaces, sending it in just a tap, and then opening it on the other device from the notification. So you've never had to kind of appease our app as part of your workflow. You've been able to do it without any of that. And so it's been interesting, like maintain that, never let that go away, because that was a victory we got right at the very beginning, actually. But you know, every new product should try and simplify, even though it complicates by adding a new thing. More of practically, it's a lot of talking. So, like for example, the most recent feature we did was a feature called remote files, and that was the newest one, which is this idea that you're sitting on your phone on a bus and you realize you want that PDF from your computer. So you can go and request it from your computer with Pushbullet. So when we were looking at that, there's a couple of things that made designing that relatively simple, which is these patterns that we now follow. So on the Pushbullet website, for example, there's a left bar, and that left bar has the tabs, which are like the sections. So there's the people, there's your devices, there's SMS if you use it, and now there's remote files. And remote files, if you click on it, takes you to a list of devices that you can use to request things from. That list is the same idea as the list of people you're talking to or the list of devices you can push to. And only after you've selected a device do you now get the first new piece of user interface, which is the File Explorer interface, which again is really simple to figure out because it's basically a clone made for the web of the file interface on a computer anyway, so you're not really learning anything new. So in a sense, and maybe this isn't obvious to anybody who doesn't live it all the time, but like we have a way of adding features now that facilitates us adding more as we need them, which is a left bar that is not bounded in a way. So what I mean by that is if we just had pushing, which we had at first, where do you put the second thing is the question, right? So when you figure out where you put the second thing, the question in your head is like, how do I make the second thing fit in really good? But if you add a third, the question starts to become, okay, what am I going to do when I add a fourth and a fifth, right? And so we basically got to the point where we were like, what is the real thing that would be flexible for us as we grew? And it's kind of what we arrived at on the website, which anybody can go and see, but it's basically a three-pane idea. So you have the left, which is your tabs. What are you in? Are you in SMS or are you in remote files? It says what you're trying to do. Then the middle, which is also still smaller, is like with what, or with whom. And then the right is the actual data itself. And it sounds complicated, but people look at it and they're like, yeah, this is so dumb. This is so easy. Boom, boom, there it is. And it's certainly not perfect, but for us it works really well. And that doesn't even talk about how we do it on like Android and whatever, but that's at least a part of the story that I think is pretty interesting, is that going from a solution for a problem of 1 to 2 to 3 and 4.
Right, so basically just making sure that from the start you have something that's an extensible element.
I wouldn't say from the start, but I would say as soon as you start extending, plan on doing more of it. So when we just did Pushbullet as the idea of moving links and files around, you know, it was probably a little premature to be worrying about what we were going to do with the third and fourth feature, but because we didn't know we were going to even build them. But I think once you pass a certain point, you know, you shouldn't make work you have to undo later, basically.
Right.
So if you build this beautiful interface for 2 features, but you know you're going to have to tear it apart when you do the third, you should maybe think slightly different about how you're doing things, because time is ridiculously valuable, because it's the most limited quantity, I think.
Right.
And energy. So it's not like clock time. It's like you can only work so hard for so many hours for so long, and ideas pile up, time passes, and stuff like that. So,
let's talk about Android though, because I feel like that conversation
Yes.
will lead into another topic that I know we want to cover. But let's
Sure.
let's talk about keeping the Android app extensible when it comes to adding new features.
Great question. So again, it actually has a very similar story to the web, which is originally it was focused on moving links and files around. And so it didn't really need to think about extensibility, but honestly, it didn't need to think about much of anything because, again, the best use of Pushbullet was never even needing to open the app. The only thing you ever opened the app for was to basically see your history. So it had a simple job, a very low-touch job. As we added more features, however, that stopped being the case. So, just to like pop open the app here, you start off with, a simple thing, and then you have to add more. And at the time, when we just got it started on this, the adding more wasn't new features. It was, okay, well, you can push between your devices, but now you can push to friends. And after friends, you can start to follow things with channels. And we're going to also add this feature called notification mirroring, so you can see notifications that you're receiving even if you didn't send them between your devices. So it's sort of a sync between your devices of notifications. And at that point, you're starting to get into the realm of you can't cram that into one big settings screen. Like, that's just not going to work for people. At the time, we decided, based on where a lot of apps were going, that we were going to use a drawer methodology, which before material design still definitely existed. Material design just formalized it in a way, made it consistent, standard, and more like attractive because they were not different everywhere.
Right.
But the idea of the drawer had been around for a while, right? The reason I think the drawer attracted us is really kind of simple. It's a left bar that doesn't steal all your screen space all the time, right? So on a computer, you don't really need all the space all the time. But you do need to put your menu somewhere. And the problem is, it means it's going to not be visible. And so the drawer, which people embraced, or the hamburger, or the menu, or whatever people call it, it basically became this de facto standard for how to add like top-level navigation to your app, as it's called, which is this idea of sections, basically. And so we just went with that. And for us, it has succeeded marvelously at its task in that we can add more features without feeling like we are overly complicating things. But even now, I would say that I do feel bad adding too many more things to the drawer because it scrolls. And so now we're invisible and invisible, meaning you have to know to open the drawer, and now you even have to know to scroll. And the feature you put in the drawer in the scrollable part is kind of like the back of the newspaper. It's not going to be your most popular feature, even if you can't do much better for it because it isn't the most popular feature. And I guess that kind of touches on what's just interesting about design in general right now is, not design in general, but design on Android, which is material design came along and gave us all of these tools to work with and standards, and really just did, I think, some marvelous stuff for Android, having been working on Android for 6 years. So I've come from, my first phone ran Android 2.0, so I'm not completely old school legit, but I'm pretty close. And so material design did wonderful things, even though I was slightly critical of it at first because I was like, oh, well, we were just getting consistency with Holo. Let's just throw that away and start all over. That's so Google, right? But I think it was a battle they had to fight at some point, so they just did it, and life goes on. But you have such limited space, and people are generally out to do just one thing at any time. And so the constant question is like, how much do you make your app do? How do people find what they want to do? How much functionality do you put in one app versus the advantages of maybe having separate apps? And where's the line per se? And I'm sure you've had some experience with that yourself.
Right. I was just reminiscing about back in the holidays when it was basically like, well, we have an animated icon for this, so that's one step towards consistency. Yeah. And going to material design, I mean, I feel like the the guidance on holo design was kind of like so sparse that it was easier for Google to kind of like throw it in the trash and start over, if that makes sense. A lot of ideas carried over. Obviously, they didn't throw the whole thing in the trash, but just like coming out with something really strong. But about the drawer, I hear criticism about the drawer all the time, that if you put anything in there at all, like if it even exists, then that feature is pretty much doomed. Like that's a great place to hide all your secrets. But I personally, so I go back and forth on this because I feel like this is just how UI patterns work, right? Like this thing gets invented that is pretty cool and like serves a purpose for designers and for apps and products, and people don't know how to use it. And so then there are designers who say, you know, this sucks because nobody knows how to use it. But then eventually there's some critical mass where people do know how to use it, right? And I feel anecdotally like we're at that point on Android, but I'm interested to know if you have any like anecdotal statistics on like, are people engaging with the drawer? I mean, they must if they plan to venture deeper into the app, which is not an app, as you said, that they have to get into very often, but still.
So the drawer, and my opinion on it, is also an evolving concept. I 100% agree that it is solving a problem and that people are definitely getting familiar with it. It is invisible, though, and this is like not nothing. But at the same time, you know, something that just struck out to me is like, think of the start menu. It's basically invisible too, but you can't even use a Windows computer without using it, right? And so, but then maybe some people do. They use their desktop and they never touch the start menu. You know, the thing about technology is that people will use it to solve their problems, and they'll use it in totally different ways than you expected, or like even suboptimal ways, but it's the simple way for them. So for us, you know, we're making an app that people generally seek out because they hear about it solving one or more of their problems. So they'll get it set up to do what they want to do, and they're good. The thing about that is that they're so goal-oriented. Like, I feel like we could almost hide it wherever we wanted, and if they really wanted the feature, they would find it. And so for us, I think the standard isn't so much like, is a drawer good or bad? It's more like it, for us, does, I think, what it needs to, and I don't know on Android if there's any more standard or better way of doing what it's doing right now. But you know, to bring up the other side of things, you know, on iOS, they do have different standards for how you do top-level navigation. And I have, in the last month or so, been trying iOS. I've usually been on Android, obviously. And the thing that I've come to learn is maybe more important than this whole discussion about drawer or no drawer is the overwhelming criticalness of consistency. So I had never used iOS before this. And so I just started to use it. And the biggest thing that I noticed, which maybe some designers would hate me for, is I really hated it when I would open an app and it wouldn't do things the normal way, because then I had to like learn it. So you open an iOS app, and if you have top-level navigation, it's generally through tabs on the bottom. And as a user, I learned that right away. And I was like, oh, great, I can get around apps. This was so simple. This is no different than the first time you open an Android app, you see the 3 bars on the left, you pull out the drawer, and you're like, oh, that's what that is. I can use that everywhere now. That took 2 seconds to learn, right? So the thing that would just irritate me a little bit is when I'd open up apps and they would decide that navigation was something they had a better idea about. And it is really hard to have a better idea about something than the idea everybody already knows, right? Like, but the thing is, objectively, it in some theoretical universe could be better, but I don't think that matters. I think it's consistency with what people expect that matters above all. And I think Microsoft may have learned that incredibly harshly when they tried to get rid of the start menu. And I think over time, like, it's just cemented. Like, it doesn't matter if it's good or bad. It is. On iOS, you use bottom tabs or you're weird. On Android, it seems like you use a drawer. And if you don't, at this point, you're weird. That might change in 6 months or a year or something. But the more time it passes, the more standard it becomes, the more difficult I think it is to justify using something else, even if you really do believe it's better. And even if it really is better, because it's not better than something everybody's used to and knows and are comfortable with, unless you can get literally everybody to move with you. Otherwise, You're just confusing. And I've been annoyed with apps as I've been playing with them on iOS when they do things too fancy. Fancy is the word I use for somebody deciding they had a lot of time to do something not normal. And yes, it's cool. It can be fun. It can be a great demo. But, I don't even mind things being plain because I'm really just out to do something. I'm out to accomplish a task. I'm opening your app not to look at it. I'm opening it to do something. So I feel like the faster you facilitate my doing something, at least for me, the happier I am. And so when I open an app and I know where settings is because I see the tab on the far right with the gear on it on iOS, I'm really happy. Or if I'm looking for settings and I pull the drawer out and it's at the bottom where I expect it on Android, again, I'm really happy. If it's not there, I'm not happy, right? Where is it then? I literally have to start guessing, right? Is it in an overflow on the main screen? Do I have to go to the about screen and there's a button at the bottom? You know what I mean? There's all these different places people can hide it, but I don't know why they'd bother.
Right. It's kind of like the XKCD comic about standards and how there are 14 competing standards, and somebody's like, wait, I can make a better one.
I'll make the standard. Yes.
Yeah.
I don't mean to enfeeble designers and say they can't explore either, because none of this was found without trial and error, right? I feel like there's two types of apps you can be making. There's the app that I want to have a large audience and be easy to use, and then there's the app where I want to express myself, and maybe they're not always the same app.
Right. Well, I would question who the second app is for. You?
A very good question. But at the same time, someone does need to try things, right? So I guess there's someone listening to this who's like, well, that sounds like such a boring job as a designer if all I'm going to do is take material design, give it slightly different colors, and call it a day, right? That's not really that. I get that as a programmer. If I had to do everything the same way all the time, I would also be sort of demotivated. But I think there's value in improving it in a way that doesn't alienate people's expectations. And I think it's totally doable, and you can be creative, and you just have to, I think, fight a little bit harder than throwing everything out and deciding you're going to be different.
Right. And I can't recall, someone said this, but deviate with purpose. You can innovate.
Maybe that's a really good, yeah.
You can innovate on the kind of mechanisms that exist, but do it because it enhances the experience and is organic to the product and the experience that you're trying to shape, and not just because you think it's going to be fun. But rewinding all the way back to the drawer becoming a standard, I think there's also because I've talked to designers for other platforms who are coming to Android. It's part of what I do in my day job, but I've heard this kind of feeling that people are still afraid of the nav drawer even on Android, so they want to do things like have it peek out at the beginning or have it open by default or something. But I think it's important to recognize, like you said, that people use tech however they need to achieve their purpose, and that means that users are not static entities. Users as a group learn, and that's why I guess establishing these standards strong from the start is important.
Agreed. I will say, actually, our app does default with the drawer open the first time you start it up, and I hadn't thought about it in a long time because it was just a suggestion Google made for apps, and so I was like, that seems reasonable. I'd like people to be aware of the drawer. Considering it only does it once, I don't even think it's that evil, just to let people know it's there. Because truly, for everything I've said, I'll backtrack a touch and say, I'd be willing to take a bet that if you put something in a drawer versus not put it in a drawer, it will at least be explored more, not in a drawer. That doesn't mean someone will use it more, but you will certainly get them to do the top level interaction more because they'll see it, right? So if you hide settings in a drawer, obviously they're not going to go to settings unless they're looking for a setting, right? So you might look at that as, oh, you've killed settings. But I look at it maybe slightly different, which is, sure, I can get people to click settings more if I put it somewhere easy to click because they might be curious. But I don't know if meeting that curiosity is the valuable part that you should be measuring, right? It's more like when someone wants a setting, are they able to find it? So if they want to stop something from happening, right? They're going to be coming into this app on a mission. And I feel like they'll get that done if they can, or they'll just like uninstall your app. And so your
Right.
choice is either make it really obvious or make it standard. And so you can go really obvious, and my guess is your settings screen will get used more if you measure use by scene, but I don't entirely know if it'll get used more in the literally used to change a setting more.
Right. And I think as you're saying this, like the thing that I think of immediately is Twitter moments and how, so I hear people say, you know, engagement with things in the drawer compared to features not in the drawer, or like when our app switched and didn't use the drawer, is the engagement is much lower when something is in the drawer. But I can't help but wonder what that actually means. Like, because like you said, just because people are clicking on it, just because, you know, you might have switched a certain couple of tabs on your website and people are clicking because their muscle memory tells them to or something, like, does that actually, is there actually valuable data behind that? And it, you know, obviously it varies from product to product, but I always kind of think that in the back of my mind.
Yeah, so I can say from like, so let's use the Twitter moments example because I think it's actually a great example. So I don't care about moments. Like I just don't care. I use Twitter very specifically, and I know what I want out of it, and I just don't care about moments. But there are times when I'm bored and I have nothing better to do, and I'll open Twitter, see there's no new tweets, and probably if moments is just sitting there one tap away, I might tap it to remind myself how little I care about moments before I move on with my life, right? And so yes, they got more engagement out of it. But did it matter? Like, I didn't get anything out of it. I can't imagine they did. I guess they maybe showed me an ad, but like, even that's probably not that big of a deal for them. Like, they got to show a lot of them, right? My random interjection in there measured across, I don't know. Anyway, and so, yeah, sure, I think engagement, you certainly can buff it by making it more visible, but I also think if Twitter started you on moments and made you go to the drawer to get to your timeline, you can bet people would go into that drawer and get to their timeline, right? Like, and actually, probably some people would fall off because they'd open Twitter and be like, well, I guess I don't really care. Because doing the gesture to open the drawer does have a cost. But all of these things I don't think are so cut and dry, like put it in drawer equals killed feature. I don't think that's a fair statement. But at the same time, put it in drawer shouldn't change engagement is also a lie. I think you should be kind of aware of what you're doing and like prioritize it a little bit. Because you can't put everything on the home screen, otherwise it's like making everything bold. Then nothing is bold, right?
Right.
So if you have an app and you have a primary focus of it, make that primary focus of it what they open up to. If there are other things, decide what are the most important and decide how you want to like make your app function. And so for Twitter, they really wanted to make moments get engagement. Well, I think they made the right choice then, not having it be in the drawer. On the other hand, that doesn't suddenly mean people are going to like moments. I mean, maybe some people do, right? I'm sitting here being the negative Nancy of it, but I just don't care. And they can't force me to care by making it easier for me to get stuck there, right? It just doesn't matter.
Right.
So. And I say all this criticism like I'm some kind of an expert. Like, there's so many things wrong with Pushbullet too. I feel like I just have opinions.
Oh, I 100% believe that any person can criticize anything they want without having done it better themselves. Because if that's not the case, then who could talk about anything, right?
It's kind of true, yes. Or it'd be very boring conversations between people that have only done all the same things because that's the only thing you could talk about is what you've done.
Right.
So,
and you
anyway.
just say this thing exists and I have no feelings about it.
Yeah.
So yeah, but the Twitter thing is interesting, and I kind of joked about Google Plus with their bottom tab bar about originally when they first introduced it, the notifications tab was still a drawer, and so you could open it by swiping or hitting. I believe there's still a thing in the toolbar that allowed you to open it, but then one day they switched it to you can't open it unless you hit the tab bar. So I was like, oh, I'm sure somebody's like engagement with the bottom tab bar went up 800% today because people.
Yeah.
It's one of those things of like software voice is what I call it. It's just like kind of like telling people how you want to use the product, how you want them to use the product by kind of like subtly shaping what they can or are allowed or are suggested to do.
Oh, I think that's for sure a force at work in a lot of things. And And you can actually even see it when people question like, oh, this app is so confusing. How is it so popular? You know, a lot of people struggle to understand Snapchat, I've heard.
Yes.
And it's like, I think that's actually a perfect case study of if people want something, it doesn't even like matter how obviously you should not set your goal to make it confusing, right? But if people want something bad enough, they'll get it. Like, you know, we're talking about such on the margin improvements, I think, with a lot of things that it's just kind of it's weird because like you need to care about this marginal stuff to deliver a great experience, but at the same time, you know, having a big argument about whether or not something should be in the drawer as a company, like it's just like I feel like maybe the first question you should have is like, how important is this? Should it even exist? If it should, like, why wouldn't people find it if they wanted it enough? Then the question is, well, but why do they have to look for it? It's like, well, because we can't make everything the main thing, right? And the thing that I actually think to slide topics a little bit on you here is the Google Plus bottom tab bar is interesting of Google. I feel like I'm glad they're doing some experimenting. You know, obviously people want consistency, but I actually feel like consistency can be stifling. And if Google's curious if Apple's onto something with the bottom tab bar, like, I think they should find out. Because if the bottom tab bar is better for people by some measure that they'll arbitrarily decide on later, like, maybe someday we'll achieve this nirvana where consistency doesn't just mean Android is consistent with Android and iOS is consistent with iOS and web is consistent with nothing. We'll end up with, I mean, there's some consistency on the web. It's just way more amorphous, right? Like your account's always in the top right. Sign out is always if you click up there and click sign. Like there's so many standards, but it's a collection of them as opposed to a like unified thing.
Yeah.
But anyway, you know, like someday this is probably going to end up all merging together because nobody actually cares if they have an iPhone or an Android, meaning like they care that they have an iPhone, but they don't care like I want my apps to have bottom tab bars because that's what I like, and therefore I'm going to buy an iPhone.
Well, do you think people are thinking that now?
No, I think right now we're like competing to figure out how this stuff all works on mobile. Like we feel like we've had phones for so long, but we really haven't. We've had them like 6 meaningful years, but probably more like 4 actually meaningful years. And so, you know, imagine the web 4 years in. Like websites were terrible, and like standards were not even remotely there. And yes, we've learned how to make standards much faster, but I think standards are very easy to make on paper and very hard for people to embrace to the point that that is how it works in everybody's head. And so I wouldn't be surprised if, given another 4 or 5 years, that either the drawer or the bottom tabs were a piece of history that, or maybe we keep both and we know when to use them. Right now it's unclear, right? So on iOS, if you use bottom tabs, that's your top-level navigation. So how do you do sub-navigation, right? Whereas on Android, your drawer is top-level navigation, so you can use tabs if you need them for sub-navigation. So I guess you use a segmented control, which is this like bar thing on the top, which is basically top tabs to be like a second set of tabs. Right. You know, like it really, if you actually look at what's going on, there are very simple problems being solved different ways, consistently in their own way, but inconsistently across things. And like, I've got a 5.5-inch screen here. There should be a best, most consistent solution that probably works everywhere and doesn't need to have such a loyalist opinion about what it is. But it's hard to get there. So
yeah, I do agree with your original point that experimentation is important. I personally, and you can read my whole rant on Android Police, I think that the bottom tab bar in Google Plus specifically is really product motivated and not UX motivated. The way that I've experienced it. But we'll see. And the other thing is, you know, experimentation is interesting because you know, if you're Google, you're doing it on a live product, with live users, with its own personality, its own goals, things like that. So extrapolating out of that, like, should this be adopted as a standard is a really tough thing to do.
I definitely agree there. Like, I feel like any conclusion they drew from that would apply to the Google Plus app.
Right.
And that's like as far as it would go.
But I'm just waiting. I'm just waiting for the day when the material design spec gets updated for bottom tab bars.
You think so? I wonder.
I don't know. I go back and forth on it. I kind of feel like that's a definition they might make. But on the other hand, there's no telling. It is Google.
Yeah. Well, you know, and at the same time, like, it's easy to be against the drawer. because it has like a critical flaw, which is it's not visible at first, right? It's pretty easy to be critical of that. But so let's say you go bottom tabs. So you've made up to 5 things visible. But what if you have 6? Right? Or like, you know what I mean? It's even that is not a perfect solution. I think it does postpone the problem a little bit, but only if the problem is invisibility, which is ambiguous.
Right.
It's certainly not good. I definitely don't think you can say it's good, but there's just so much more to it. Like, you know, I feel like some people, when they talk about engagement, they feel like people open an app without any purpose and are just like probabilistically clicking buttons. And it's like, that's just such a broken model for the way of thinking about how an app works.
Yeah.
Like, yes, you're right. They will accidentally click your tab more often if it's visible, but like, in theory, should they not click that because they wanted it? Like,
right.
And if they want something, like, you know, obviously don't make it hard, but where's the balance? I don't know. It's amorphous. I'm not sure if my point is coming across, but
no, it is.
It's sort of disrespectful when people are like, oh, it's not like accidentally tappable, therefore it's not tappable. It's like,
right.
Is that really actually true? Like, I feel like you've basically just said that everyone uses a phone, doesn't have any idea what they're doing, and is just like accidentally installing apps, accidentally using them to do productive things, and like, I don't think that's true.
They never learned anything from the rest of their apps. And it is funny that you bring that up, because I totally think that some people think that way is just like they'll open this app because of the sheer magnetism of our brand, and then once they're inside, it's a new world every time, and we need to make sure that they can see all of the pastures and canyons and skies.
Yeah. And, you know, I bet, so I'm making productivity and utility-oriented software, so my opinion has been shaped by that work. My guess is if I was making something more, like, innately social, I would want people to get sucked into it a little bit. But I still feel like the thing that's going to suck them in is going to be the quantity that's going to either make you successful or not. So Facebook app, like, it almost doesn't matter it obviously matters, but it's not the important part. What matters is the things your friends are doing are in a feed there. So you can go and see what your friends are doing. Like, that's the part that's going to suck you in and keep you in. And the more Facebook lets you do that, the more I think people will spend time in it. Facebook's such a complicated thing because they do so much, such a big app and whatever. But, you know, I don't think it's too scary to think of, like, what do people care about? Like, why did they even install this app? And, you know, that's what I want to make easy and makes, like, great.
Right, so. Exactly. Wow. So, yeah, covered a ton of ground on many, many topics. In that I want to, like, shift gears completely around back to product design, to a topic that I've been looking into a lot lately, which is monetization. I feel like there's this phenomenon in the, like, if you want to call it the app economy, of people, or not people, but just in general, there's a problem of like how to sustainably sell a product in the app market. So one example that I keep repeating is like Sketch. So Bohemian Coding, there's a post on Designer News that said we need Sketch for iPad Pro because it's like, in my mind, I would love to use Sketch on the iPad Pro because I use Sketch every single day. The iPad Pro has a huge display. It's just like a fun thing to use. And someone from Bohemian Coding who makes Sketch came by and said, we're not going to do that because, first of all, like, the interface for Sketch is not optimized for touch right now. Like, it just isn't. But also that it's not sustainable to sell a product like Sketch on the app market for the price that they would need to sell it for, especially because you can't do trials on the App Store. And so Sketch is like $99 or something, so it's like pretty expensive compared to most regular apps. But even getting down to just regular apps, users kind of seem to have this expectation sometimes of buying an app for 99 cents or just for free, even buying it for 0 cents and getting lifetime updates and all of their wishes are granted and everything just keeps on going forever, which I guess was started with the beginning of the App Store. And And like, yes, it drove adoption because that's 99 cents is like a negligible price to pay. And it's just kind of snowballed from there. So I want to get like a general sense of how you feel about this topic. I know I just rambled for like 18 paragraphs about it, but but I want to get a sense of like how you feel about this topic overall, and then mapping that onto Pushbullet's model, kind of how you arrived at the subscription plan getting as detailed as you want, and just how that compares to like some of the other models.
Yeah. I think this is actually a ridiculously interesting topic, and I feel like it's very timely to be discussed because I think the app ecosystem is maturing a little bit, and others, companies have arrived at this point before, and some will arrive later, but the app store is not new anymore. And so, when it was new, everyone was making apps and launching apps and getting popular and discovering what worked and enjoying it. And developers in general like to play with new things. And these were like the hottest new things to play with, the Android market and the App Store, right? And I remember being a young developer, and I just like the idea of making an app and releasing it was just like the coolest thing imaginable. But at some point, and a little bit of reality sets in, and I think it's kind of setting in everywhere, which is why this is kind of coming up so much. And it'll keep coming up, and maybe it's not even existent. But like the idea of a sustainable business is difficult because it takes a lot of money, and you can't make a lot of money selling an app for $1. And so what I think, oh man, I just have like so much to say. I don't even know where to start on all of this. Okay, so here's what I would say first. So there are, I think, no real fault on the user side for any of this. So they have been used to getting free apps, and life is good with free apps. Why would I pay for apps when I can get free apps? This has been true on Windows. Like this has been true for like literally all of time. But not all apps have always been true. So Windows, you had to pay for every upgrade. Adobe, maybe somebody paid $700 for it in the past. I'm not sure. I feel like everybody just downloaded it for free. But in theory, somebody paid for it. And so there was basically this division between like freeware, shareware, free software, and very expensive paid software. And at some point in time, advertising came along and made it so that if you got sufficiently popular, you could just give software away for free. And this kind of, I guess, happened with the advent of, I guess, the internet and Google and Yahoo and all that fun stuff. But advertising came along, and it turns out you can give a lot of stuff away for free. But now we're at the point where, like, what's the point I'm trying to get at? Like, everyone uses advertising, and everyone is used to every app being free. But if you actually take a step back and you look at the top apps on the App Store, you will not see a diverse set of companies. You will see Google and Facebook dominating the top app charts by far. Like we're talking, half of them, which doesn't seem like much, but actually is ridiculous that so few companies control so much of it. And ad-supported, like whether it's through the apps itself or from the company's other apps, it is basically the model behind every single popular app. And the reason for that, I think, is relatively simple, which is bills come every month, but a one-time purchase does not come every month. And some people might say, well, aren't people buying it every month? In theory, yes, but the thing is your app generally has a life cycle. It's popular, people buy it. It stops being as popular, people stop buying it. But like that doesn't stop your bills from showing up, right? Unless you've like moved on to do something else. But then you're like constantly chasing this like never-ending, non-recurring amount of money, which incentivizes you to build very light, easily dropped, not supported apps that end up just aggravating people. And I think that's the situation we're in right now, which is users want an app that's great, that keeps up, that improves. But they only want to pay for it once. And I don't blame them for that. On the other hand, you have a developer who's like, that's funny because I literally can't do that unless I'm working a day job somewhere else, in which case, why am I making a free app for you? Right. Or making like a cheap app for you? And so what you end up with is this dead zone, in my opinion, where you have either independent developers working part-time on free apps they give away because they either don't require a backend or don't require much work or just, they can do it. And then you have the giant companies that basically make their money through advertising. And that's fine. I don't even mean to sound all against advertising or whatever, but we should just like look at the facts. It's like there's a reason popular apps are free and they do make money still. And so the question when to touch on Pushbullet a little bit here, and I know I've been scatterbrained on all this, I hope it makes somewhat of sense, is can a small but not part-time, can like a small independent shop exist on mobile? Can it support a small company, like a real small company that has a few people on payroll and like doesn't and like supports a product, doesn't continue to make new products and drop old ones? And so when we looked at models for supporting ourselves, our choice was like, okay, one-time purchase. Well, that incentivizes a certain type of behavior, which is we need to get some number of sales every month. So the only way to get sales is to get new people to buy the app, which means the only people I'm making features for are new users, because everyone that's already bought the app is no longer going to help me keep paying the bills, right? So I can't focus on them. And so what it incentivizes is bloating apps, growing apps, more apps, like not the things a user that really wants a great service should even want a company to focus on. So if you kick that out, then you have to think of recurring revenue, and your choices are basically advertisement or subscription. And advertisement is like by far the more popular, more chosen, probably vastly more successful, not probably, definitely vastly more successful choice. It only works for certain types of apps, though. It needs to be an app that gets extremely high engagement from a massive audience to make up for the fact that basically every user doesn't make you that much money. And you add on top of that, I'm not entirely at peace with, I just don't like the idea that ads are everywhere all the time. Like I don't like the fact that this might be the universe we end up in, which is you must use an ad blocker for the internet to be useful. And apps are basically this thing where you get most of the screen, but there's like an ad over here and in there, and like you can't even pay to get rid of it if you wanted to. Like thank God for YouTube Red, because like to me it's like worth it. I don't want to see ads all the time. But anyway, that's another tangent. But most apps, they don't even give you the choice. So either you're going to see ads and you just get used to it and you're desensitized to it, but like, I'm going to share a short story. A cousin of mine was playing Minecraft, and I thought it was adorable. Okay, I was at a wedding, and I saw my cousin, and he was playing Minecraft, and he's 7, and I was just like, this is like awesome. And then he was showing me his house, and an ad popped up that literally wouldn't let him play his game and tried to convince him that Sprint was a better network for his cell phone. Okay, he's 7, and his mind, like, he knew this happened. Like, apparently this happened all the time. His eyes literally glazed. He stared at the screen. He didn't even talk to me. He just like literally stared at the screen without having any idea what was happening, just waiting for that clock to tick down so he could keep playing his game and continue to talk to me. And I was just like this is like not entirely that great. Like, are we really happy with that? And so when it came time for us to decide a monetization model, I was like, okay, either Pushbullet is or isn't going to make it. If it makes it, shouldn't it do it on my terms? Like, I'm spending so much energy and so much time on this. I want to make something I think is great, which means I want to be aligned with the people I want to support. Therefore, even if it's unpopular and definitely going to get me hate, like, I'm going to have people pay me directly, and then they're my customer. They're who I focus on. And I make the app better for them because I don't need to go and convince new people to sign up. I have my base in a very Patreon or Kickstarter-y way where it's like, these people apparently get a lot of value out of what I've built. I'm going to make it better for them, and they're going to keep supporting it. And guess what? Indefinitely, they're going to have a great app that just gets better, right? And so for other apps, you know, like I don't know how much of an, like, you buy a burger for $4, you eat it, it's gone. I feel like if you buy an app, you should be happy you got it and never expect anything else. And if it happens to get better, that's awesome and you're very lucky. And the app is probably doing extremely well and they're very lucky, but that is not the default. And so maybe that sounds negative. I don't know. I feel like free apps are great. A lot of apps can do it. Like, it so happens that Pushbullet has higher expenses because connecting devices implies having a server and like a high level of software expertise. Like, you know, it's not popular to say, but like, if you're good at building things and you're going to spend your time doing it, you should be aware of the cost you're paying yourself by not working for somebody else making the money, right? Like, so if I could be working somewhere and making some amount of money, but instead I'm building this, is it really crazy for me to want to make at least enough money to pay rent, right? Like, is this like so ridiculous to people that I can't, like when people were discussing our pay model, it was like, it couldn't possibly cost more than 1 cent per month for me to be a user. So why are you expecting me to pay $3 per month for a year? And it's like, because you're apparently valuing my time at literally 0. I value it slightly higher than you. And if I'm going to sustain this indefinitely, I need to be the one that's happy with this. You don't have to pay, but I have to keep working. And so that's kind of the thought process that went into it that I think everyone's not familiar with, and I can't blame them because no one's talked to them about it. But it's right now apps, I think, are pricing themselves unsustainably, and a lot of developers are learning it and getting a lot of hate for it. I have a friend in Chris Lacey who manages a couple of launchers and a few other products that he's built, and he's not been people's best friend as far as, he's had to find a way to make his business sustainable, but that hasn't necessarily meant what users expect. And he's explained it time and time again, and he's done things that I think really make the difference for making it less unappealing. So when he launched a new launcher, he didn't take the old one away. People they bought a product and they kept it. What I think was made very clear was that the expectations weren't that they bought a product. It's they had bought a lifetime subscription for a one-time fee, right? They had I am forever going to be on the latest and greatest because I spent $4.
Right.
Now, I don't mean to criticize $4 as being not a lot of money. Who cares about the amount of money? The idea is expectations, and that's the problem, is a developer has expectations that they'll be able to pay their bills if they're doing this full time, and that means they got to make money, right, somehow. And yeah, it becomes people are forced to do things that aren't necessarily friendly but are just practical.
Yeah. So I guess.
Sorry, that was really long.
No, not at all. So I guess there has to be kind of this uncomfortable transition where expectations are changed. And like you said earlier, it hasn't been so many years that we've had this going on, but it's so ingrained and so convenient for people that it's going to be a very uncomfortable transition. But I do think that ultimately it has to happen. And to the point of ads, I totally agree with you. It's so fascinating to me that so many digital display ads, and I was just talking about this with someone the other day, both on the web and on mobile, are kind of geared towards perhaps misleading metrics, if that makes sense. So you show an ad to a 7-year-old for Sprint because it's a better network than whoever they're competing against at the time. But A, the 7-year-old does not care. B, many of these ads have very small targets for how to close them and are forcing you to look at that. So I am constantly in the state of questioning these ads and, if the benefit of running them actually outweighs the fact of just how silly they are, if that makes sense.
So I guess I'll bring this to the internet a little bit to address your point. So they are silly and they're ridiculous, but they are literally the only way for people to make money often. And the thing is, without money, it all goes away. It doesn't seem like it, but people get paid to do things. They don't just usually volunteer to do them, or some do, but it's not generally the case. And so if you want your software, someone's getting paid to do it, so money is coming from somewhere. And ads, the problem is when people can't pay for software or are completely unwilling to, and ads are the only way, ads become terrible. And that's why ad blockers are basically required to make the internet useful. So what I think is so crazy is that people hate the internet without ad blocker, and there are so many horrible things done by ads. They fry battery, they make tons of requests, they slow down the web. They're literally monsters. They're horrible, horrible things. But because free is so much more powerful than even a pittance, and again, I can't blame people for this because I'm not going to pay for something that I could get for free somewhere else. The idea of just charging is not a solution. But at the same time, this is what we've earned. This is what we've decided is what we want. We want a miserable internet that we need software to protect us from because we want free. And that's not the problem so much as if, YouTube, I really do respect that they launched YouTube Red because they finally gave me a choice to actually pay. And I feel like if YouTube Red succeeds, more Google things might offer you the ability to pay instead of have to see ads. And there's this interesting startup called Brave, which is founded by one of the former Mozilla guys and the guy who created JavaScript and whatever. And his whole idea is that it's a browser that will replace ads with ads that are well-behaved. So you'll still have ads, but they won't be so horrible. And when those ads are shown, the website will still get paid, even though the website's ads were replaced. But you, as the user, can pay the browser to not show you ads. Now you might be thinking, well, I just get that for free with ad blocks. Like, that is going to kill things. It's going to make things worse. That's like not a sustainable future where you never pay for anything. Like, they're going to show you ads, and they are going to come up with the nastiest, worst ways to do it, and there's going to be an escalation to the point of like destruction. Not actually, but it's just not a pleasant future. Whereas if you could just tick in $10 into this browser, and like that's all it took to browse without ads for a month, like $10, like it might not be much more than that. And like all of a sudden, guess what the internet is back to? The internet is back to this place where it's great, and there's not ads popping up, and not everybody wants to get you on their newsletter, and not everyone's blocking your screen and forcing you to watch auto-playing videos. And like, you know, everything everyone wants in the internet comes back when money flows a little bit. Right. And yeah, so I've basically, like, ever since launching a pro version, I have had so much thought on all this, which you're now getting a dump of. And it's not like clear, it's not clear or whatever, but like, I hope that the point of money must flow, so money will flow. And if you don't like the way it's flowing, then you need to change how it flows. Right. And so ads power everything, which means ads are the most important thing. So when you land on a free news article and they block your screen to ask you to join a newsletter and you get pissed off, that's fine. They don't care. Go away. Like they literally couldn't care less, because you seeing the article is the bait, not the point. And so, like, that's what ads incent. I don't know. It's kind of gross.
Right. Yeah. And so, like, I go back and forth on this. So first of all, Brave is very controversial because the sites basically get a revenue cut of the ads and not the full price, which
I didn't say it was perfect. I just thought it was really
interesting. But it's an interesting point because it's controversial for that reason. But the like practical alternative that we're seeing is that people just block the ads outright, and then you get zero. So which is better? That's another question. But my actual point is that I feel like advertising online doesn't have to be so bad. Like I feel like it's been allowed to kind of like run amok, and as I don't know, there's probably an interesting sociological question here, because I feel like there's a reason that ads got so gross. I mean, pop-ups have been around for a very long time, but there's probably a reason that they got so bad. Was it lower engagement? And if so, why? And I mean, these things are nearly impossible to measure when you're advertising. I mean, you can measure how many people click on something, how many people convert, but if you're measuring in terms of like brand impression or how many people saw it, then that's a whole different ball of wax. But I think there's an interesting question about like if we could all just agree, and I'm saying we as if we're advertisers, which we're not, thank God, but if we were advertisers and it was our job to advertise on the web, and we all agreed to just like be responsible and find ways that weren't terrible for the user, that weren't, like you said, I mean, going to a site and the articles, like you seeing the article, which is the apparent point of the site existing in the first place, is actually not the goal of the site or the goal of the advertiser or what have you. It's like a really bad spot to be in. So if we were able to find some solution that was still advertising but wasn't that, then it would be interesting to see if people still blocked things.
There is a future, for sure, where advertising bottoms out and recovers in terms of like the experience it delivers to a user, for sure. And in fact, we can see sites doing really great experience around ads. Like Google's properties, I think, even YouTube, where they force you to watch a 15-second thing, like, it's inconvenient, but they're not blowing your browser up, right? Like you land on some pages and it's just like, whoa, back button, you know what I mean? And so what I would say is I think the problem right now is a little bit of a tragedy of the commons, or like a prisoner's dilemma thing, which is like, if only everyone could agree, but the problem is it's in everyone's best interest to be the one guy that doesn't. So if everyone did it great and you were the one evil one, you'd make so much more money than everybody else. And so nobody can let you be that guy, because they're just giving you their share, basically. And so, you know, it's the same, like, to draw a horrible analogy, just to make sure people understand it, even though I'm going to be totally wrong on all the details here. It's like fishing in the ocean. Nobody owns the ocean. You make more money the more you fish. But guess what? The more you fish, the less fish there are. Eventually, the less fish there are for you and everybody else. But at any given moment, you make more money when you catch more fish, right?
Right.
And so, like, yes, ads are horrible, but the more you get people trapped into seeing them, the more money you make. So you keep coming up with ways to trapping them into seeing ads and clicking them, right? And someday I think we will get out of it because I don't think it is sustainable. I think in the end, like, some level of like balance is met, like TV ads, right? In theory, TV could agree to show twice as many ads, and there is nothing anyone could do.
Right.
But for some reason, if they've found this balance of 10 minutes out of 30 is ads, and it kind of sucks, but like it's not getting worse over time, or maybe it is now. But like compared to the internet, it's like much more static, right? It's just not changing all the time. Whereas the internet is like, man, they're coming up with new tricks all the time, and it's more dynamic, it's more exciting, but I feel like if only I could just, put a little bit of money into my browser, as it were, not necessarily Brave, but anywhere, and just like, because the thing is, I don't want to pay on a per site basis. I don't even know what sites I go to, right? I'm just browsing the internet. I don't want to have to take subscriptions out with like everybody, but the idea if I could just pay some entity and get a better internet, like it would be nice to have that choice. Not everyone would take it, but that'd be fine. Those that didn't take it wouldn't be murdered by ads as much because they wouldn't be so desperate to get every single speck of money they can from ads because they might have a more stable income of like, I have customers,
Right. And yeah, I just question, like, people are making a lot of money from ads that are malicious, but who is it that's providing content for those ads? Like the advertisers can't be seeing a good return on clicks or impressions or whatever that are from malicious intent. But anyway, that's probably...
Yeah, I don't know. You're very right about that. I feel like you'd have to... Someone in the industry might know. I don't.
It might be one of the unsolvable mysteries of our universe. But in the meantime, I think we're going to probably see a lot more native advertising that kind of can be blocked. Things that are in line or part of or actual content, which is... that's annoying too, but it won't crash your browser, at least. So
yeah, it's another evolution. Like maybe it doesn't. Native advertising doesn't have to be terrible, to be honest. Native advertising, I presume we're talking about the idea where an article or part of an article is like sponsored but made to look like news or like a blog post or something like that. So. That is really touchy because news is usually put on this pedestal of being like unopinionated, unbiased, unbought. Like, but I hate to break it to you, but like, not you, but like I hate to break it to the audience, but like all of news is paid for by someone, and you can bet they're like aware of who, and every single one of them decides on a different level of sort of pride that they're going to take in their journalist thing, and. Native advertising is, I think, just another way of people deciding where their line is. For example, I love Airbnb, and if I ran a blog on great companies and Airbnb wanted me to write a great article for them, like, sounds good. I love Airbnb.
Right.
It's not perfect, but like I would be happy to write an article, and I feel like that's a great way to make some money because I support Airbnb. Now they're supporting me, and I'm getting them customers, and it's like a fine relationship. I don't feel like that's that dishonest, especially if you say at the top, I got paid for this. It's like, doesn't necessarily stop the article from being true. It certainly is not going to work out that way in reality because you're going to end up with articles that are blatantly lies.
Right.
But
well, you do already. I mean, that kind of thing exists, but it's.
And I feel like the world would be much simpler if it was very easy to just pay for things and if things didn't have to be expensive because it was so easy to pay in small amounts. But this isn't reality. Unfortunately, we pay in small amounts with our attention through ads. I think that's really all it is, right? Like a website is willing to serve you up content for a penny, you could browse for a month for probably like $2 in terms of ads is my guess. Just a random guess. I could be totally wrong, but like $2 a month gives you all the internet you want ad free. Like if you could pay that, I feel like so many people would take that. If it was as easy as saying, I would pay $2 to get rid of all of this crap. It's not that easy though. So, because how do you give fractions of pennies to sites for millions of people, right? Like it just doesn't exist.
Right, exactly. So. It's a sticky situation, but I think we're at a good point for things to kind of like get started with changing. Yeah. Hopefully.
People are aware of the problem, and that's step one, right?
Yeah, exactly. The first step is admitting you have a problem, and we all have a problem.
And The best thing about tech is like we're talking about this, and maybe it seems like the podcast all of a sudden took a downer turn on the internet or whatever. But like the internet isn't going anywhere. Interesting things are going to happen, and it's always, at least in my lifetime, for the next 40 years, probably going to be the most interesting component of human life is the interconnection it grants us. Like
Right.
The internet is amazing. Ads are just this awkward stage where we're trying to figure out how business models work on it, and we'll figure it out. It's going to be fine.
Yeah, we should be excited to be part of this evolution.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to look back just like we do on like affiliates and, oh man, so many interesting things from the dawn of the internet when I was just getting started. Like there was a lot of interesting stuff that happened. Pop-ups, for example, before we blocked them, maybe, and then banner ads before we realized text works better. And now we're learning, turns out text doesn't work, but if you put it right in a news article, it's great. And then if, on and on and on.
I remember pop-up blockers, and then I remember the banner ads that were like, they were made to look like games so that you would click, and then you'd be transported to this other universe.
Yeah.
Great.
Not that I think about it, to be honest. I feel like many of the properties people use most of the time probably do ads relatively well. I bet the thing that it's just when you end up on sort of the long tail of the internet, you start to have issues, I think. If you're on Facebook, Facebook is careful. They track the hell out of you, but that's not necessarily out of raw maliciousness. It's just like they just want to make more money from ads, which means they need to know what ads to show you, and like that's just how ads work.
Right.
Same with Google and same with Twitter. And like when I think of all the main apps people spend most of their time in, the ads aren't really experience ruining at all. It's more just like when you land on someone's website, they have a hard time making money because they aren't Facebook and they can't like put the ads somewhere and sell their own ads and manage the network and like control all of it, right? They have no control. They just slap someone else's JavaScript on their page, which is the code that shows the ads, and then poof, all of a sudden ads are showing up on their page, and like maybe suddenly they start misbehaving, but they don't have any control. What recourse do they have other than to like use a different ad network, which is just going to do the same thing? It's like buying a different airline's ticket when you get delayed the first time. It's like, yeah, you really showed them. Wait till you get delayed by the next one, right? They're all the same. So
Right. And that is interesting because, of course, Facebook controls its whole ad setup itself. And, this is such like a small example, but working for a newspaper in high school, like we were responsible for selling ads. So, but it's interesting that like websites now, I guess because of scaling issues, it's a lot different running like a small newspaper versus a website that gets 100,000 visitors a month or whatever. The people don't sell all their own ads. Like they don't, we no longer have sheets that say like you can get a half column for $50 or whatever.
Yeah. Well, and it is just kind of a friction problem, right? So the person running the website, and I know people probably know this, but I'll just say it quick anyway. People running the website, they're writing some form of content, and that's what they like to do. Ads are how they make money, but they're not in the ad business. They're in the making great content business, right? So I'm going to outsource my selling of ads to someone who's really good at it, in theory, right? And then from the ad buyer's perspective, it's like, I just want to target the audience. I don't want to go and make 50 deals with 50 different websites. That's going to take me all year. I just want to put $10,000 into a bucket, have it disappear overnight, and poof, I've got some more downloads, right? And so that you'd have to overcome that, I think, is really difficult. And you have to be Twitter, Facebook, Google scale to even like justify it, because
Right.
if people can't drain $10,000 a night on your site, it's really hard for advertisers to justify it, because there's like one ad person who's got a budget to spend. Literally, the money, they're like, you must spend this as well
Right.
as you can, but you must spend this. We need those people. And the delay for biz dev on making deals with individual sites is just not sustainable either.
Yep.
So I don't know.
That makes sense, unfortunately,
Yeah.
but
It's okay though. Just to reiterate, like
yeah.
I love tech, and this is all so interesting. I love seeing it unfold. I think the thing that was really interesting about our discussion slightly earlier about paid stuff when I was telling the story is like we had to go through a little bit of like very harsh reality ourselves and do things that weren't necessarily popular, but I really believe that we made the choice of subscription instead of ads 100% faithfully to deliver the best experience for the people that were getting the most value out of Pushbullet. Like that is a true statement. It might not be a popular statement. It might not be like the prevailing wind right now, but I feel like that's the universe I would like to be the prevailing wind. If I don't want to pay for a million things, but I pay for Dropbox, I pay for YouTube Red, I pay for Netflix. I pay for, like, if you really use something every day, which many people do with Pushbullet, and you really value what it's doing for you, like sub $10 a month starts to get into the realm of not ridiculous. And then we're even lower than that. We're not $1 a month, but that's because our software is much more complicated than I think a $1 a month piece of software is. And also $1 a month, you pay so much in transaction fees, you get like 50 cents. It's like,
right.
Like I could, if I charge $2 instead of $1, I make 3 times as much money in a way because I get 150 instead of 50, right? So it's like, anyway, doesn't matter, just math.
Yeah.
But yeah,
it's probably something we could fill many, many podcasts with.
Yes, most certainly.
But yeah, I guess that wraps it up for this episode.
Sure.
Barring.
That was fun though.
Yeah.
My first opportunity to really kind of let fly some of my thoughts from our experience charging. And I know not everybody who expressed their opinion, positive and negative, will necessarily hear this podcast, but sure. I hope some that do at least learn something. Like I really was, like the most thing that bugs me the most is when you're accused of being greedy.
Right.
It's like, that's like kind of hurtful. And I know that sounds so weak to complain about someone being hurtful on the internet. Like the internet is pain, but it's like, it's just like, oh, that's not true. That's just like that's not fair for what I'm trying to do. And I dislike it, but at the same time, whatever. I don't know.
Yeah. Well,
it's the internet.
It's a question of, I mean, I have to think about this all the time. Like as a designer, when you present something to anybody, any person, the public, a client, whoever, the first thing that they see before you even say anything is what you're showing them. But they don't see the kind of thinking that went behind it. So your like thought process of being able to focus on users, new and old, and not like forget one of those groups because you have an obligation to find more of the other group or whatever. And like while simultaneously not making the app a pain in the ass because of ads, right? so like there is a process to everything, and that's why, I wrote a post about this a long time ago, but whenever something gets redesigned, there's this huge upheaval, like YouTube. People hate when YouTube changes, but the reality is that a lot of thinking goes into it, and you just kind of have to eat your broccoli and be an understanding human.
I like that eat your broccoli statement. But yeah, change is interesting. Some part of me gets annoyed when things change, but at the same time, to live in a world where nothing changed would be the opposite of why I love technology so much. And
sometimes it can be challenging, and you might learn something new. That's probably being a bit too optimistic for most of the cases that I'm thinking of, but
sometimes it can go wrong for a little too long. Like I was not a fan of Windows 8 and 8.1. That was a long time before that got fixed.
Yeah.
But generally, that's not the case. Usually, if a mistake was made, it's fixed very quickly.
Right.
So,
which is the other great thing about tech. But anyway, we have had an excellent conversation tonight. So
great.
I'm glad to have you.
I hope people find it very interesting. Yeah. And if any of them want to talk more, I run the Pushbullet Twitter, so they can just tweet there, and I'll see it.
Awesome. And for listeners, that's
at Pushbullet.
Perfect.
An easy one to remember. We didn't have to do something crazy like at the Pushbullet or something like that.
Yeah.